This is your Lake of the Ozarks fishing report for the Upper Osage of Lake of the Ozarks. Today is June 17th, 2017, and this report is courtesy of Joe's Lake Ozark Guide Service. We're sitting here in June, just after the spawn. Fish are starting to really make that transition into their summer patterns and kind of where they're going to hang out the rest of the summer until we get some cooler weather later on in August and early September. So I thought I'd show you some of the lures that's currently working now, but also show you some locations on our Navionics map, kind of like I did with the spawning season, and just give you some locations, some ideas of kind of what's going on. Right now the lake level is at 659.5. It has come up a little bit, and Ameren says it's going to continue to rise a little bit this week, and then by the weekend they're planning on dropping the lake back probably a tenth a day, get it back down to 659. So it's probably going to go up to about 3/4 of a foot for this week, and then they're going to pull it back down a half a foot to 3/4 of a foot, through the weekend. Water temperatures 77 degrees up to in the afternoon. Your temp gauge might read in the low 80s, so it's hanging around that 80-degree mark. Water color has been the most drastic change of what we're seeing. Still muddy out on the main lake because they're still pumping water through Truman. Truman is still a little bit high from their normal pool, but the main lake's still a little dirty, but the creeks have cleared up a lot. Last report I did, in the creeks, water clarity, you could see down about 8 inches or so. Now you're able to see down about a foot to about 1.5 feet. So that's a big difference what happens in the creeks. And so what that's done is kind of pulled the fish kind of off of some of those creek channel banks, so they're not really right up on the bank like they were. They're not really up nosing on the very shallow water on those secondary points. They've kind of pulled off a little bit. So what I've been catching more of my fish on has not been as much on the square bill because they're not up tight on those banks. We've kind of having to go to more of a medium dive crankbait as those fish have backed off. So let me show you what I'm catching some fish on right now, and then I'll kind of run you through on the map with some locations that you can try. On these points, with the current that we've had, the current was extremely strong, and these points were, it was very difficult for the fish to kind of get out into the current on the main lake point, so they were kind of hanging out just inside the points. They've reduced the amount of current by over 50% from what they were before, the force of it. So those fish that were hanging out just inside the points, they're going to move out more further on the points. So anything you can throw, heavier jigs, deeper diving crankbaits and so forth, that'll work for you. The medium to deep diving crankbaits, I like to throw the Berkeley Power Worm. I just think that's a good summer bait up in the river. I'm not sponsored by anybody, but I'm a big fan of the Power Worm. I really do think they hold on to the bait just a lot longer. Then I can also take this same worm, go back into the creeks, and pitch these on lay down logs and stuff like that without having to change the size of the worm and so forth. Because you'd be amazed how many smaller fish you do catch on a big 10-inch worm. So that's one of the baits we're using out on the main lake. Like I said, the crankbaits, choose whatever crankbait you want to choose. I don't have one to show you. Just whatever bait you have, it's going to run anywhere from say 8 to 15 feet. That's probably a good crankbait you could use right now. And then as the creeks have cleared up, that's kind of started helping out the topwater bait. So again, you can throw your Zara spooks. I've been throwing pop R's because the fish are kind of coming off the spawn still a little bit, so they're not really in a mood to chase as much. So I've been using that pop R to pop it and stop it, pop it and stop it. The whopper plopper, here's a whopper plopper. I'll show you this in here in a minute when I talk about the bluegill spawn. But whopper plopper is another good bait. You can crank it and stop it, crank it and stop it. So the topwater, you choose your favorite topwater bait. Just work it a little bit slower than normal than you would, and you should be able to get some pretty good fish. Actually, we've been getting last weekend we got some pretty good fish Saturday morning on a good topwater bite. Back the creeks haven't really turned on that much. You'll find a few fish back there, but not in the concentrations that we would like to see. As we go on the next few weeks, I think we're going to get more fish in the back of the creeks. So all right, let me show you, and another pattern that's starting to pay off here too are pitching some of the docks on the main lake flats. And you can pitch those with your favorite lure that you like to pitch with. The 10-inch worm's a good choice. Your standard jig with a crawl is a good choice. Any of the creature baits. I like to throw a D-bomb rigged on a jig head. It's a beaver style bait. That's a good bait to throw. You've also got brush hogs are great choices that you can throw on theirs too. Another, which reminds me, another bait that you can throw on the point that on these main lake points and secondary points, because the water has cleared up a little bit, you can start throwing the Carolina rig a little bit. Carolina rig is not probably the #1 bait you would throw in the upper lake area, but because the water has cleared up, it does have its application. I put a big brush hog on the back. This is actually a Chomper's Boss Hog. What this is, just a green pumpkin color. And one of the things I do with my leader, because there's less visibility, I usually use a shorter leader. Short as a foot and a half. I don't use that 2 and 3 foot long leader when the water's dirtier, because those fish are reacting to that sinker banging on the bottom. And a lot of times in dirty water, you'll actually feel that fish hit the sinker. So we'll put that shorter leader on there, and then they can find that bait just a little bit easier. So let me turn my camera and show you some spots on the map here of kind of what we've been doing and what I'm looking for right now. All right, hopefully we can see this. Get this to stand up for me. Okay, I think we're in pretty good shape right there. Okay, one of the things we're doing on these main lake points, looking for a pointer here. One of the things we're doing on these main lake points is I'm definitely looking for points that are close to the main channel or close to current. So on this river channel here, we've got the main river channel that actually runs right along here where I'm pointing with the point of the scissors. So what I'm going to actually target when the current is running at a pretty good clip, I'm actually going to target these main lake points. And when the current was so strong, it was pushing these fish from out here on the main lake point to just inside the creek where these docks are. They were close enough to the current, but they didn't have to sit out there and fight the current, so they could run out, grab bait, or bait might wash in and wash around. And I think it was Friday I was out, I noticed some big schools of gizzard shad just kind of hanging out on these main lake points or just inside these main lake points. So that's where I'm throwing the bigger jigs, the deeper diving crankbaits, the Carolina rig, you know, and stuff like that. Another thing we're catching some fish on, like I said, is the main lake flats. If you go the creek channel side on this side, then on the other side you've got a flat side. You can see this light blue area right in here. That's your main lake flat. So we're pitching these docks, but in any of these situations where we're looking for these fish, there has to be shad. So if you idle over this point right here and you don't see bait fish either flickering on the surface or you don't see any on your graph, then I would leave it and motor on over to the next point that you want to fish, because if we're in that point now where if there's no bait fish there, the bass are probably not going to be there either. From now until they spawn next year, these bass are going to 100% track these bait fish. That's what they're going to do. It could be bluegill back in these spawning pockets still, or shad out here on these points. But that's they're going to be chasing their food source, and that's what they're going to be doing till they get ready to spawn next year. So that's one of the patterns we're using. The back of the creek pattern. You know, you can get on some of these flats in the back of the creeks. If there's shad back there, you can back there. There's isolated logs and stuff back there. These fish will get on. They'll just kind of roam, chasing the shad back there. When the sun gets up and you get bright days, then you can pitch these docks with jigs, creature baits, tubes, whatever you want to throw, whatever you want to pitch. So that's kind of what's going on with the back of the creeks and with the points. One more thing that's kind of going on is a bluegill spawn. Let me enlarge this. We're at the point, the water temperatures, when the water temperature gets anywhere from roughly 70 to 80 degrees, the bluegill are going to spawn. And these bluegill will spawn every month all the way through. You'll find them spawning even in August sometimes on our lake. And what they'll do, the bluegill will find these protected pockets and bays, just like I've got right here. And so the bluegill beds, if the water's clear enough, are pretty easy to see, because you're not just going to see one round circle on the bottom. You're going to see multiple round circles. They seem to build these beds in pods, is what they seem to do. So you're looking for these multiple round circles. And what these bass will do, if there's a bluegill bed sitting, say, right back in here, in this back part of this little finger, this little pocket, what some bass will do, they'll just kind of hang out on these docks, these bass will. And what they'll do, they'll pick off bluegill that come in the next wave that gets ready to spawn, and they'll pick off bluegill as soon as they spawn, and they go back out to the deeper water where they might like to hang out. And then the next month, the next wave moves in, they'll move in there. So some of these little bigger bass will hang out on these docks or logs or overhanging trees or whatever. And they'll kind of hang out and they'll just kind of pick these bluegill off as they come and go. So again, that's another pattern that you can fish for. You can use just fish and use the bluegill spawn. What lures do I use when we use the bluegill spawn? Topwater baits are really good. Poppers are good because the bluegill will be up popping the baits. Squarebill crankbaits are good again. You can pitch your jigs and so forth. But like this topwater bait I've got right here, if you can see it real well, it's a whopper plopper, but it's kind of a bluegill color. Got that orange belly on it, and it's a good bait. I hope you can see that. But basically, it's a bait that's in a bluegill color is what I like to do. And then when I do go back out on the points or back of the creeks, then I'll go back to more of my shad colored type topwater lures. So that's kind of what's going on right now. One thing I've noticed right now with the bait fish is they've really, especially in the back of the creeks, they've been kind of stuck down on the bottom. You don't see a lot of them flipping up on the surface. When you do start seeing those fish flipping up on the surface, then those bass are going to also rise to the surface, and that's when the bass will start suspending up underneath these docks. But if those bluegill are down, stuck to the bottom, these bass are going to kind of be hanging around any rocks or wood that are also on the bottom. So I know there's a big BFL tournament going on out of the river this weekend, and good luck to all the people who are fishing it. Right now, with the current the way it is, these fish are current oriented right now, so they're going to hang out on the main lake. So the better fish. So the fish that were hanging out right here, with the current being reduced, I expect those fish to kind of move out more into the current flow. That's what I expect them to do. If the current picks up, then they might just kind of slide back out of the current a little bit too. So you just kind of have to hunt and peck and look around. And not every point's going to have that on there. That's why you want to use your graph, go over it, find bait fish. If there's no bait fish there, get out of there and go to another one, because there's probably not going to be decent bass there. So I hope this report helps you guys out fishing the tournament. Good luck. Be careful. There still are some logs and debris floating in the main channel. There was a big catfish kill up there last week. No one really knows why. Just a lot of catfish floating in the main channel. Seems like may have happened way upriver and was kind of floating down. Didn't see any other species floating other than catfish, so hopefully it's just an isolated thing, but don't think it's really affected the bass. Because the water is clear, they've kind of backed off a little bit in the creeks, but if we get some rain before the weekend and that water dirties up, then those bass are going to move right back towards the bank. So that's where your squarebill and stuff like that can also be effective. Spinnerbaits too. Anytime I'm talking about squarebill, you can also throw a spinnerbait. The back of the creeks, you can throw any other kind of horizontal bait other than topwaters and squarebills. You can throw your rattle traps, spinnerbaits, etc. Chatterbaits are also good, so too. So good luck in your fishing. Be safe and be careful. Thank you.